Hey friends, welcome to our Baltimore Presbytery cooking class. This cooking class is a new project we're working on. Through this project, we hope to provide you with recipes and dishes that will perhaps give you an opportunity to try and cook dishes you may never have tried before, maybe even from different cultures from around the world. We have a lot of great resources in this presbytery, from people to cultures, to worship styles, and yes, of course, my favorite, food. Our hope is that this will be a creative outlet for you and your family and friends. Please enjoy. So for our dish today, I will be sharing with you one of my absolute favorite foods from my childhood. This dish for me brings back wonderful memories of my family eating dinner together and my mom lovingly and painstakingly preparing this dish for all of us. As a little bit of background on me, I grew up in Texas, but most of my family is from northern Mexico. As a matter of fact, my mom and dad and sister were all born in the same city, in the same hospital, delivered by the same doctor, my great uncle, Abelardo Lopez Padron, who happened to be an obstetrician. With our family being Mexican, I grew up with a lot of wonderful and traditional Mexican food. Things like chile rellenos, mole, barbacoa, fideo, migas, homemade flour tortillas, buñuelos, and of course, Mexican rice and beans. So I now have to take the opportunity to acknowledge my amazing mom, Gueta Lopez, who is not only the best mom ever, but she's probably the best Mexican food cook ever. And so it's not just me who thinks so. You can ask my wife and my kids. Thank you, Mom, for all of those, all of the love you've shown us, not only through your cooking, but through the countless ways you show your care for us. We love you and thank you. Okay, so growing up in Texas, we didn't just eat traditional Mexican foods. We also enjoyed a mix of Texas and American staples like hot dogs and burgers, pizza, and Texas barbecue. Oh my goodness, I love me some Texas barbecue, but that's a conversation for another day. So the food that I grew up with was this wonderful mix of family recipes, American food, and of course, our own little personal touches that make each dish unique and special. So today I'd like to share with you one of my all-time favorite dishes, entomatadas. Now, most people are familiar with the traditional Mexican dish, enchiladas, which are corn tortillas wrapped around some sort of stuffing like chicken or beef, potatoes, or cheese. Covered in a savory sauce like a red enchilada sauce, or sometimes a green chili sauce, or a sour cream sauce, or even a creamy cheese sauce. Now the name enchilada, however, specifically refers to the past participle of the Spanish word enchilar, which means to add chili pepper to, or to literally season with chili pepper. Now, enchiladas originated in Mexico and can be traced all the way back to the Aztecs. And since then, Mexican people have adapted their version of enchiladas to fit with their own personal style. And so depending on the region and the local ingredients, enchiladas can vary in sauce, filling, and even presentation. So if enchilada means to add chili to, or chili peppers to, or smother in a chili-based sauce, then entomatadas means to add tomato to, or smother in a tomato sauce. And so the main difference between the more commonly known red sauce enchiladas and an entomatada is indeed the sauce, one being a chili-based sauce and the other being a tomato-based sauce. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but other variations of enchiladas include enmoladas, which if you're familiar with the Mexican dish mole, then enmoladas are comprised of corn tortillas filled with chicken, usually, and then smothered in a mole sauce. I used to love when my mom would make mole and take the leftovers and convert them into enmoladas. Man, those were the best. Another variation of enchiladas are known as enfrijoladas, which again, if you're familiar with the Spanish word for beans, frijoles, and the singular frijol, then you may have deduced that enfrijoladas are smothered with a bean sauce. Now, my mom wouldn't make those quite as often, but when she did, I loved those too. But without a doubt, my favorite enchilada that my mom would make is her incredible entomatadas. And if you can base how good a food is on based on its leftovers, then these were a home run every time because there were never any leftovers. So today we're gonna make chicken entomatadas with melted cheese and avocado slices and a drizzle of crema. Now, I'm not a professional chef or a cook. I'm just a home cook like many of you. And the thing that most of us home cooks know is that if you don't have a particular ingredient on hand, then you have to make do with what you do have. In this case, because the grocery options are limited right now, I was not able to get a true Mexican crema, and we have to make do with sour cream, which is a perfectly fine substitute. If you are fortunate enough to find Mexican crema in your local grocery store, it's a wonderful addition to enchiladas because it's basically a table cream similar to a creme fraiche. And so it has a milder taste than sour cream, and it helps round out the dish. As a home cook, we make do with what we have, which basically means that I've never made this dish the same way twice. Sometimes I'll add different seasonings and spices depending on what I have in the pantry, or sometimes I'll try different fillings. Like one time I used leftover shredded pork from a pork shoulder I smoked out on my smoker. It turned out awesome. This other time we used black beans and came up with a black bean filling, and it was amazing. And so, to me, that's the beauty of cooking, and that's what's so fun about it. Once you get the idea of the dish, you can experiment and come up with your own variation. One of the great things about entomatadas is that because it is a tomato-based sauce, a dish, it doesn't really carry any heat. So it's a great family dish for those who don't like spicy foods or for the kiddos. On the other hand, if you do like spicy heat, you can certainly add as much as you want throughout the cooking process. One last thing, this recipe is just the entree. I almost always serve my entomatadas with rice and beans, sometimes with guacamole and homemade chips, sometimes with margaritas, and sometimes with buñuelos and ice cream. It all depends on the occasion. For now, we'll work on just the entomatadas and save the other recipes for another day. So, I hope you enjoy this dish as much as my family does, loves this dish. And for a detailed ingredient list and step-by-step directions, be sure to check out the recipe located somewhere close to the link for this video. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at jlopez@baltimorepresbytery.org. For this recipe, we'll need chicken for the filling, and you can prepare the chicken in any number of ways. You can boil it, bake it, saute it, however you feel like preparing it, as long as it's cooked. You can even use leftover chicken from a previous recipe, or as I like to do, you can buy a rotisserie chicken, and that works just fine. For this version, I had some chicken in the freezer, so I just decided to boil it with some onions and garlic and a little bit of seasoning, just to give the chicken a little bit of extra flavor. And once the chicken is cooked through, we want to allow it to cool off enough so that you can handle it, so that you can pull or shred it, shred the amount that you will need. And typically 1 or 2 chicken breasts will be enough to make 10 to 12 entomatadas. And I'm always pleasantly surprised at how a little bit of chicken can go a long way once you shred it. It almost seems to double in volume. Now you can choose to shred the chicken or using your hands, or you can cut it up into bite-sized pieces with a knife. Whichever way, it's perfectly fine. I like to shred it because that's the way my mom used to do it. And so what I like to do is, once I've cooked the chicken, I transfer it to a plate that will allow it to cool. And then from there, I'll transfer it into a decent sized plate. Once it's manageable and I shred it apart, I'll put it into this a bowl. And here's a little extra pro tip. Once if you boil the chicken with veggies and seasonings, go ahead and use some of that broth to mix in with the shredded chicken. That way the chicken can absorb some of the liquid and it'll stay moist and won't dry out. Let's move on and start working on the tomato-based sauce, or salsa. Believe it or not, salsa in Spanish is the equivalent to the English word sauce and can be sort of a catch-all term which includes dressings and gravies. It's not just a specific condiment like what we get at restaurants or in jars at the grocery store. Salsa means sauce and can refer to a number of things. So for instance, una salsa de chocolate simply refers to a sauce made with chocolate. Another thing that many Americans don't realize is that most Mexican salsas are cooked and are usually meant to be consumed warm or hot. So Melissa and I always joke that one of the signs of a good or authentic Mexican restaurant is how they serve you their salsas. If they are warm, then there's a good chance that they are authentic. Of course, this is just a rule of thumb, and there are a number of reasons why a restaurant would serve cold salsa. Additionally, not all salsas are meant to be served warm. Once you start getting into the more technical gastronomic side of things, then people play around with hot versus cold and deconstructing the components and all that. But for the most part, the salsas that we are familiar with, the ones we use to dip our chips or drizzle over tacos or nachos, should generally be warm. And that's true regardless of whether it is a chili-based salsa or a tomato-based salsa. I think it helps to remember that cooking a salsa helps us taste the different elements of the salsa. Cold salsas, like cold sauces, usually don't allow us to taste the depth and complexity of all of the different components. So our salsa will be cooked and we'll keep it warm enough that we won't hurt ourselves when we handle it with our hands. And so just like the chicken, we can use shortcuts to help our process for the sauce. If you want to use canned tomatoes, that works just as well. I often use canned tomatoes, especially if I'm short on time. You can use any variety of canned tomatoes, diced, crushed, stewed, it's totally up to you. Now typically I use a canned tomato sauce and then I just doctor up the flavor a bit by adding the seasonings and spices that I like or have on hand. Remember, this is going to be a sauce that we're going to cover the entomatadas with, so it can shine at whatever level you want it to be at. If you have a killer tomato sauce recipe and you want it to be the star, then great. If you want the sauce just to fade into the background, great. It's totally up to you. Also, if you use fresh tomatoes, you can add even more layers of complexity in the way you make your salsa. You can boil or roast or grill or saute your tomatoes. And today, I'm going to show you the way that I was taught by my mom, who learned from my grandmother. This method is also used in making my favorite homemade salsa that I use for chips and other dishes as well. So for this version, we'll take our fresh tomatoes and grate them using a box grater. This will give a nice consistency to the salsa. It won't be too thick and chunky, yet it won't be too smooth or runny. I typically like to grate the tomatoes into a bowl, as that helps capture all of the juice and texture from the tomato. course, be careful with a box grater because even that can cut you and hurt your hands a little bit. And when you get down to this last little bit, I usually save these and I dice them up finely, and then I add them back into the salsa. So once you've grated enough tomatoes for the sauce, you can cook the sauce in a shallow pan and season it, or a pot, a sauce pot, and season it as you wish. Again, you can adjust the consistency to your liking. Sometimes, and oftentimes, salsas are blended using a blender to get a smoother consistency and break up the big chunks. But it's all up to you. I personally grew up with this style of salsa, so I prefer its texture and consistency. Now, once you get to that point where the salsa is to your liking, you should take that small pot or pan and cook it through thoroughly. And I often like to start off with a small little bit of oil in the pan, and then I saute some garlic and onions. And once those are cooked and the onions become translucent, I'll add the tomatoes and cook it through. And once it's done, I'll allow it to cool off enough that it won't burn when we handle it. Let's move on now to cooking the tortillas. In a separate shallow pan, we'll heat up some oil. I typically like to use vegetable oil, but you can use any oil that you're comfortable with. Just keep in mind the burning point of the oil. Some oils, like olive oil, have a higher burning point, so they burn more quickly and aren't usually as great for frying. Now, the reason we're cooking the tortillas first before dunking them into the tomato sauce is so that the tortilla can keep its integrity and not just become mush in this sauce. It also adds a little bit of flavor, but mostly it helps keep the shape. So you take the tortilla, submerge it in the oil, and you cook it on each side for 30 to 45 seconds. And I usually like to use a couple of utensils. If I have them, I'll use 2 wooden spoons, as it keeps me from having to handle the hot tortillas with my fingers. You can also do this step in batches, cooking the tortillas ahead of time and setting them up for later. And I like to layer them around a plate, spreading them out rather than stacking. And I think this helps keep them from sticking together. So once the tortillas are cooked, we'll dip them into the tomato sauce. Again, for another 30 seconds to 45 seconds on each side. From there, you can transfer to a plate or a baking dish. And once the tortilla is cool enough, you can just add enough of the shredded chicken mixture to make a little line down the center of the tortilla. At this stage, you can add as much filling or as little filling as you like. I always liked when my mom filled them up pretty well. That way you get a good solid bite on each bite of chicken every time you take a bite. And so once we get this together, you can roll up the tortilla with the chicken filling, making sure to tuck in the end underneath. Kind of, if you roll it towards you and tuck underneath, roll it away from you, and you can slide it to the side and use the wall of the baking sheet or casserole dish to keep it from moving. And you can do the same thing. You roll it with your fingers towards you, and then at the same time away from you. And then you tuck it up next to the other tortilla. And so if you stack them and snuggle them up together like that, they won't unravel. Now that we're getting close to finishing the dish, we have a choice. You can plate a singular plate if you like with just enough for yourself or for one or two, single plating them like this, and you can present it the way you like. Or if you're going to feed, say, a large group of friends or family, then you can put the entomatadas into a casserole dish like this. And once you've stacked the entomatadas, you can add a little bit of extra sauce on top, then add the cheese to your liking. And once again, for the cheese, you can use any variety of cheese that you like. Just keep in mind the meltability of and flavor of the cheese, which if it's too strong, it can overpower the dish. So for me, I like to use a good melty cheese, something like a mozzarella or a provolone. And if my local grocery store has it, I like to use queso Oaxaca, which is a really lovely cheese from the state of Oaxaca in Mexico. It's really great for these purposes, for melting on top of the entomatadas and enchiladas and other dishes. But sometimes my grocery stores don't have them, so I use whatever we have on hand. And since Melissa and I have young kiddos, we usually have some sort of shredded cheese in the refrigerator. And so that's what I'll use today. So once you assemble them, you can add the cheese, and then you can pop that into the oven at 350 degrees for a few minutes, just enough to melt the cheese, which is what I did here. Then you can go back and you can add on top of it anything that you like. So we've got this the sour cream here. We can kind of drizzle that over the top. For this, when you present it just one like this, singular plate, it's really nice to do it that way. Additionally, if you have avocados, which I love, we can take some sliced avocado. Be careful when you're cutting an avocado, as we all know, that can be fairly dangerous. Okay, so we'll take this side of it, we'll make some slices here. Then we'll scoop out the avocado meat, and we'll just lay it on top like this. Try to make it as pretty as you can. And then you can add any other garnishes that you like. Sometimes I like to throw in some chopped or diced onions and cilantro. It's really up to you. And so this is what the end product entomatadas will look like. We can scoop them out of the casserole dish and plate them just like this. Well, friends, thanks for joining us for this cooking class. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have, and I hope that you enjoy making your own version of my family's favorite recipe, entomatadas. Buen provecho. Bon appetit.